The conversation for today is hopefully going to be a really good one you enjoy, because we're going to dive into the understanding of when and what to eat. And this breakdown of these steps is something that I'd really like to just make sure we cover depending on what you want to dive into. So if you have any questions around nutrition, around what you're currently eating, around any questions that you have for me personally, just drop them in the chat below. So coming back to this all started with an understanding of, I'd love to give you, if it's helpful of course, access to our 2-week gut reset plan. Now, this is a framework that we use with our clients when coming into the initial phase of the program to really kickstart some awareness around high quality foods. Now, what this comes with is a full breakdown and planner around meals through Monday through to Sunday, some options for each day, and then through the 3 or 4 meals that they're eating throughout the day. There's a whole lot of variations that we obviously do male to female, and then a breakdown of all those recipes, the servings, the ingredients required, all of the normal stuff. And then when you come to the bottom, we've also added in like a full grocery list and some extra steps there as well around the preparation. So what I want to do is, if you want access to this plus all the meals and really just giving you some ideas of what you'd like, what eating looks like and how we can maybe kickstart some positive change from a health standpoint, simply comment gut reset below, and Jared and the team inside the group will reach out to you and send that to you directly. So if you want access to that, just comment that in the chat. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube or elsewhere, please, I'll add a link below so you can join the Facebook group, our Body Reset group. You only get access to this through our private channels through that group. So if you're watching that elsewhere, simply comment, check the description for that link so you can join our group there and we can go from there. All right. So that's the program that I'd love to give you access to, is our 2-week gut reset. We've had hundreds of clients go through this process now, and really, really positive shifts to get those quick wins in the initial phase of the program before going through something more personalized as we start to dive deeper with their nutritionists and next steps from there. All right. So what I want to dive into today is really break this down into some of the thought processes and concepts behind this, so that we don't just give you a plan that you follow for 4 weeks, right? There are far too many people that want a quick fix that works for 4 weeks, and then we fall back into old habits. And if you're anything like many of the people I know, or many of the clients that we've worked with, there's very much an all or nothing attitude, right? And when we're following a plan, we're smashing it, we're making it work no matter what, and then we get tired, works get busy, kids' sports start taking over, whatever it might be, and it goes back to nothing rather than all, right? All or nothing, it's kind of one or the other. There's nothing in between. And we need to get rid of this binary, it's either on or off, and start to really create a spectrum of change towards positive improvements we can make in the right direction. And this is really tied into the psychology of change, because we're so much more likely, so wired to look for the negative, the things we haven't done, rather than focusing on the things we have. So unless we're nailing everything, we don't feel good about ourselves. And that's really not realistic. It's not sustainable. It's not something that's going to really be around for the next 20 years. So coming into this with a different concept of what success really looks like becomes a way of breaking it down into digestible chunks that actually are going to work every day. So that's one. Number 2 is going to be adjusting our environment to make sure we win on default, meaning if we're relying on discipline and willpower and we're not taking into consideration the temptations we're surrounded by, then that's always going to make a big difference. And I think, if nothing else, one of the biggest things from our Meta Project program is this awareness of your motivation comes back to your environment. So if you're not plugging into a space that's allowing you to really raise the bar for yourself, I think that really starts to be an issue that gets in the way. So that's certainly something that we look at a lot as well. So first is taking the time to create that breakdown of smaller steps. 2 is create an environment to make sure we can look at change. And 3 is understanding why. Because what you did when you were 20 is very different to what's going to work when you're 40, 50, 60. And I want to walk you through some of those changes today so we understand the skill set of change. We understand the skill set of what you're going through right now, rather than just following a blanket program and not getting the results from it beyond the 4-week mark. And that's really where I want to make sure we can help you. All right, cool. So when we dive into this a little bit more, like I mentioned, the goal of this program, or the goal of this video today, is just break down the foundations of nutrition to build the tools required for long-term success. And I want to make sure this is specific to where you are in your stage of life, so that we get an idea of it being relevant, not just helpful information, right? There's a lot of information out there, but what's actually relevant and specific to you right now takes into account a lot of factors. So when we build out a personal plan with clients, we take in so many different things like training age or lack of training age, whether you're sedentary, whether you're moving a lot, whether you're recovering from a lot of severe gut issues or an injury or something along those lines. There's a lot of components that we take into account, but if we can break that down into a really simple tool belt that you can use moving forward, I think this training will be really valuable for you. So 2 parts that I want to dive into today, just to separate this a little bit, is going to be setting up for success and then understanding the gut role. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger of a topic, or make sure that we can go a little bit deeper and understanding the variables that really we are working with. Because the thing that we need to take into account is that when we're working from home, when everything's regimented, when we don't have kids, then it can be really, really easy for us to simply make our own meals, have it set up in the fridge, and it kind of being simple. But as soon as we start having work lunches, we start going out to dinner, we start having holidays, vacations, or trips, then those start to become more of like a what if, or what are the main concepts I need to take with me on those travels or dinners, rather than the exact meal of chicken or rice, or whatever it might be, which please, hopefully it's a bit more varied than that. So I want to give you the variables that you actually look with, so that when you go to those occasions and live life, then you have those things to consider. All right, so first one is this idea of setting up for success and taking into account, as I mentioned, those variables that we look at. So if we look at a bit of a breakdown, we need to get a consideration of this whole macros and calories component, because there's a lot of nutritionists out there currently, or simple coaches online, that are saying that it's all about calories, right? And to some degree, it is relevant, right? Like when you look at thermodynamics and looking at needing to increase calories or decrease calories, that certainly plays a role. But the difference between you being insulin sensitive and you being in a position to utilize those calories versus someone who's sedentary, who doesn't exercise a lot, whose nutrition is not quite on point, which may be 99% of the people watching this call, because we're not, looking after a house as much as we once were, then this is something that a calorie is going to be absorbed and used very, very differently. So the reason I bring that up is because we need to take into account a lot more and consider a lot more of this picture to realize that we're not simply a machine with food going in and out. We need to make sure that we look a little bit deeper. So we have food consumption over here, and then we have our exercise over here, right? But if we make sure that we look at both exercise and we look at consumption, we need to look at considering these other factors that we look at. So on the input, just really quickly, looking at our relationship with food, right? I always talk about this awareness that the damage that we do to ourselves by stressing about having the cookie or the cake or whatever it is tends to be worse than the cake itself, provided it's not happening time and time again, right? So the guilt and shame that we give ourselves about, we're tired, we'll just have that cake, or we'll go out for dinner or whatever it might be, and then we stress out about what that's caused, can sometimes be an issue, especially if we don't have a good relationship with food. There's always a stress and overwhelm of what should we eat, what's healthy, and with so much contradictory information, that really gets in the way. The second one that we look at is nutrition timing, and this is a really, really big one. Now, just to quickly go through this is quite a core component, to be honest, with our coaching program, is understanding this awareness of nutrition timing. Said more simply, where we place foods in the day for particular outcomes. Meaning, should we have carbohydrates in the morning? Should we have carbohydrates at night? When should we place our fats, proteins, all the rest throughout that day? So generally those main three macronutrients. The reason that we take this into account is what we've observed, and from a research background, what we've found is there's, I'd say, a very, very high likelihood, 90% plus, of people that tend to be metabolically inflexible as we get into those later ages, 40, 50, not later, but mid ages. And as we start to see our body become more sedentary, if we're not moving as much as we would once like. Now, how to know that you're metabolically inflexible? You start to store a lot more body fat. You start to feel sluggish in the afternoons or throughout the day. There's dips and dives in energy. Potentially there's a sleep quality issue. You're waking up during the night for food, or even just during the day, that increase in cravings becomes more of an issue, right? Metabolic flexibility is what we're talking about. Now, one way that I'll get you to visualize this is this understanding that if I was a fuel tanker and I had all this fuel stored in the back, but I wasn't able to utilize it, I still had to go to the fuel station to fill up, right? That's what the body's like when it's metabolically inflexible, because we've got all of this storage, right? We're starting to store more and more body fat, which is what it is, right? Stored energy that we haven't utilized. So if we have all this stored energy around our stomach, our body fat, and our body's not utilizing it, it's not breaking it down and burning it, then as soon as we get low in energy, we have to find more food, because our body's ability to break down our own fat reserves is not there, meaning our ability to drop body fat is massively hindered. So really, really core part of timing is taking the time to improve this flexibility through trying to get the body using fats as fuel, using other forms other than purely simple carbohydrates that is much more fluctuated through the day. When we start to look at insulin-controlled living, which is a really, really core part of a long, happy, healthy life, is one of the core parts that we need to take into account. Is most people are coming up with an insulin spike, and then insulin spike, and then insulin spike. And this is breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? Whereas if we can take the time to break this down into some more of a undulating through the day. And that's certainly not through taking, 3 to 4 meals is usually quite a good mix, but simply getting rid of these spikes that are causing our insulin to be secreted 3 or more times during the day. The problem with this is we start to get these lows as well, right? Now, if we see that drastic difference in our insulin through the day and the body having to manage the toxic glucose levels in the body, then we're going to run into some pretty big issues. But one of them that will be more noticeable is that increase in fat storage. So taking the time to balance out, this little line here is our insulin secretion, right? This is all going to be controlled through improving our sugar intake, right? Through making sure that our body's not just using carbohydrates as fuel, but starting to look at other forms of fats, of other forms of food that we can take into account. And that all starts with this conversation of nutrition timing, all right? So I don't want to take too long on that, but when we take the time to look at input, this is a really, really key factor in realizing that if you had all of your calories in one meal and it was very carbohydrate dominant versus spreading them out through meals through the day and having your proteins and fats and whatever ratios that fit for you make a really, really big difference. One thing I do want to be really, really clear on is carbs are not bad, right? These are something that are still very, very helpful as we get older. As I mentioned, insulin sensitivity is going to decrease, meaning our ability to utilize the same amount of carbohydrates may go down at some degree, but it is certainly not something you're going to remove entirely, and especially on the female side, it's something that can still be very beneficial. In saying that, this is something that's going to be fluctuated and something that where those carbs are placed in the day certainly make a significant difference. Okay. Last one on the input side that is worth taking into account is looking at how we're eating, right? This sounds really, really simple, but 3 things that we're not doing particularly well is chewing, is being aware of where we're eating, i.e. not in front of our computer or TV. And then 3, are we having fluids around meals? Now, as a general rule, a lot of people are not having nearly enough water during the day. And a really nice metric, if you're interested to work towards here, is going to be simply 30 mils per kilo of body weight. Right? Now, if you're doing this in pounds, then simply divide pounds by 2.2 and you'll have your weight in kilos, right? But essentially 30 mils per kilo of body weight allows you to get towards an amount or target that we can work towards. So if you're, say, 100 kilos, then your intake for the day is going to simply be 3 liters. Now, if we look at most people there, or what I've observed is we're generally only getting about 1 liter a day, and that's not including, or that's usually including things like coffees and teas and things through the day. We want to make sure that there's 3 liters of actual water. It makes a significant difference to the body, especially when we realize that 70% of our body is water, right? Beyond that, it's really just fats and other forms. Well, we're quite out of our actual makeup, we're majority protein, but from an actual molecular makeup, there's a lot of water there, right? If we're not hydrating the body well, brain is not going to function as well, our joints are going to feel weaker, we're not going to sleep as well. There's so many things that are going to be impacted by water. But slight tangent. So water, eating, and conscious awareness of when we're eating are going to be 3 components of this food consumption, and all aspects that I really, really implore you to take into account when we're looking at the skill set of change and really having a high quality relationship with food and how our body's digesting it. Now, this is obviously a 10-minute conversation before we've even dived into the rest, which is how much exercise. It's not just more, right? The big thing I want to get rid of here, especially as we get into our 40s and 50s, is more is not the answer. A lot of the time, the sweet spot for a lot of our clients is 3 to 4 workouts a week, right? And trying to make sure that it's more a case of improved quality of those workouts, right? If you're trying to work out more than 30 to 40 minutes in a session, we start with 10 as being our recommended dose, if you will. If you're doing more than 30, 40 minutes 3 times a week, then usually we need to start looking at frequency. We need to start looking at quality of movement rather than simply doing more. Because as we get older, our body's ability to break down muscle tissue increases, which is a bad thing. We need to improve our ability to maintain muscle mass, being able to maintain a level of recovery that really allows us to move forward there. All right, so that's one that we really look at. So when we look at output, as I mentioned, there's a lot of things that are going to shift, not necessarily bad, but certainly different. Hormones are going to naturally decline down in age. From a male standpoint, this is something that actually starts from when you're 30 to 40, and you usually see about a 1 to 2% decrease in testosterone from there on out. And for most men, they tend to see a 1 to 2 pound increase in weight from there on out also, right? Because they don't take this stuff into account. On the female standpoint, you see this more drastically through a 5-year period, 5 to 10 year period. But the real issue for you usually comes through when it's a discrepancy between progesterone progesterone and estrogen not dropping in a balanced format, right? So something to really take into account there. Now, stress levels, again, not something we're not going to remove entirely, but certainly something we can be aware of and create a level of resilience around breathing, around body awareness. Daily activity has always been one that we've looked at, right? The classic 30 minutes a day, but trying to make sure that I'm standing doing this presentation as opposed to sitting, and navigating those small shifts in our environment to get more daily activity. Sleep quality, this is something that people tend to take for granted or tend to just accept that we're getting worse quality sleep as we get older. And if we're not getting at least 6 hours of high quality sleep in a row without broken sleep, waking up the whole time, this is really something to consider that is drastically improving or drastically decreasing your ability to burn body fat, increase muscle mass, just feel fantastic on a day-to-day basis. And this certainly comes back down to a hormonal component as well, right? If we're not eating enough, we're stressed out all the time, immune system is huge, but this goes both ways, which is really interesting. One, you either get sick all the time, or two, you never get sick. You may think that's a positive thing, but if you never feel sick or run down or anything ever, then this really becomes potentially an issue also, right? Our natural response in immune system is when they tag certain pathogens or certain particles in the body that should not be there, right? Viruses. There should be a little bit of a time where you feel slightly off, right? You feel run down, you feel tired, and this is your immune system naturally working as it is. If you never feel tired, then your body's really blunting that entire response, and it's not particularly helpful. The next one here is that recovery component, right? As I mentioned, this very much comes back down to the sweet spot of exercise, making sure that it's not necessarily more, it's just making sure we're getting the high quality stuff in the right doses. Now, this is something where we see a lot of people move from, I'm going to use a triathlon example here, where we tend to move from sprint distance like triathlons or, the usual hour and a half type triathlon, and we start moving towards, half Ironmans. And it's not simply because we get better at endurance, it's because we get worse at strength. And people tend to just do more and longer stuff as opposed to getting more effective workouts in that time. And this is really, really a problem because we simply get slower and weaker over time and less effective with the effort we're actually putting in. And then the last one is something that comes up, and we talk about this a ton, is noticing these sensitivities that start to come through. And this is interesting how often it becomes a process of foods that we never used to be sensitive or intolerant to before now start to really cause issues to our gut. And this is just, by the way, for ladies watching this call, is about 80% more likely to be it's about 80% female, 20% male in regards to the issues coming through. So it's certainly more female dominant, and that certainly has a hormonal factor coming through, but it's all comes back down to how that biology is changing over time, and we tend to see more sensitivities come through. And this is something that you really need to consider, because if we're not identifying the root cause of these sensitivities, then everything else and how that body functions, how things are working, starts to really decrease as well, and that becomes a really big problem, right? So identifying the root cause of foods and sensitivities that are causing you to be more inflamed, more tired, more bloated, more gassy, whatever it might be for you, really start to impact and inhibit your ability to drop body fat, feel strong, energetic, and obviously sleep quality is a huge one there as well. So gut health is something that we look at a ton from an output component. Now, all of these, as you can see, is, it's a brief conversation about what we're looking at, but we're starting to have a more well-rounded conversation of simply not macros and calories, but really understanding what do we need to take into consideration to feel good in your own skin. What are some things that we use to both put down the accelerator when we need to, i.e. adding in the exercise, but more importantly, especially for people watching this call, are usually motivated, have at least previously exercised and want to simply get back into it. It's more a case of knowing where that brake pedal is really going to allow you to go faster. You can't go around a track by just smashing the accelerator the whole time. You've got to know when to use the accelerator properly to get the most out of that vehicle around a track. It's the same with your body. If we're just trying to push and push and push, and we're seeing things break down without the pit stop, without the taking the car to the mechanic, as you will, is something that we need to start to consider. So hopefully that starts to give you a little bit of a breakdown, a little bit of an understanding of where we're going with this conversation, and why it's so much more than just simply a nutrition plan, but more the awareness of how that's impacting how that body works. All right. If there's any questions on that, team, please let me know. I can walk down any route you like, just to make sure that's it makes a bit more sense. So the one thing I want to take into account here, which is really, really important in how we've constructed our entire program from a behavioral standpoint, is making sure that we're considering how the human brain works. Now, as I started today's conversation, this idea of people being all or nothing in their general approach to fitness tends to look something like this. We go up, we nail it for 2, 4, maybe even 6 weeks, and then life hits and we plummet through the floor. Right? We just go back to old ways. And it's because what we're trying to do is we're trying to nail 1, we're trying to nail 2, we're trying to nail 3, nail 4, whatever, all of those habits all at once, rather than taking the time to look at how do we really install these over time. So the simple consideration that we're going to look at here is how can we break these down into simple steps, making sure that we're taking the time to build them as we go. Now, as you can see, the general trajectory of this is going to be consistently upward. It's going to be something that allows you to exceed well above what you would have done trying to do it all at once. But more important than that one is starting to bring an idea of at each level of these habits, we've now made this an installed part of our day. Now, what that means is we're now creating new baselines at every level, which is really, really key to know, because as soon as we hit a slip up, we have work gets busy, we have the kids' holidays, whatever that is coming through, this is where we simply drop down to the new baseline, right? Which is at the previous level that we set up, not right to the floor like we did before, right? So now what we start to do is we start to create these tiny habits to start with that really create an exponential result over time, right? Or at least a linear improvement that way, potentially not exponential. But when we look at that through that lens of change, and this is a huge, huge part that hopefully you can take from this, is we beat ourselves up so much about failing with certain health endeavors, right? But it's because we're so installed to approach health like this, right? Follow the plan, get really excited, do it all at once, rather than simply taking the time to consider that the approach that we're used to using is potentially flawed. So when we look at breaking these down into steps, we start to have a much more tangible, actionable conversation of change, of being able to apply this to your life long term, knowing that there's kids, there's animals, there's work, there's all of the stuff that we're having to deal with on a daily basis. We need to make sure that this is actually an achievable component. And if every one of these steps is an 8 out of 10 of these or more, meaning it's at least, it feels really easy to do on a day-to-day basis, meaning when you're feeling good, it's next to no effort. When you're feeling a bit tired, you can still get it done without too much rush. That really makes a significant difference, because we can start to really build those habits over time as something that really sticks, something that creates true change without the need for the discipline and willpower coming through. All right. So if there's anything on that one, guys, or want to go through, please let me know. But that awareness of structure, or just questioning the approach that we're so programmed to use, this all or nothing attitude, we break it down into habits that can actually work, and we start to have a smarter conversation of what components of this are we really going to tackle. It becomes less about adding in the new boot camp or trying to suppress calories, but more about how we can support our body through change, knowing that we have to have that health base before we look at performance, right? And I've kind of got ahead of myself, but this is really how most people try start change, is we're so under, suppressed through stress and overwhelm or underslept or whatever, and our body's just not functioning particularly well. Sometimes it feels like we're running on fumes and we need another coffee to keep going. We need to start looking at this, as I mentioned, that health before performance. How can we clear the tray? How can we make sure the ute's actually ready to take on more? The body's in a position that it feels energetic, or it feels like it's actually going to recover. And this is a huge part when we look at exercise in the lens of, is it going to be more effective, or how many times should I train a week? It really comes back down to how much can I recover? Because very often it's not an overtraining issue, it's an under recovery problem. And when we start to look at all the components that we just had a conversation about, the nutritional timing, are we metabolically adapted? Are we in a position that our hormones are working on our side, or that we're taking the time to address levels of stress that are going to impact the amount of training we can handle on a particular week? We start to look at all of these components that actually make a difference of building that health base before we go any further. All right. So really, when we look at this all or nothing approach, motivation is really not a good strategy, especially when it's extrinsic motivation, or especially when it's a finite goal, as opposed to how do I want to do this in 5 to 10 years. If I start to build this immersion of this is just who I am, this is how I feel great, then we start to really create a much better habit, a much more installed framework about how we live our life, and we look forward to these things in our day. All right, big concept that I think we should use with everything around these health endeavors is, if we can't do it every day, don't do it for one. If we're trying to go through a 2-week diet to strip off the fat quickly and then go back to old ways, then what we're doing is we're suppressing our immune system, we're suppressing hormones, we're dropping a little bit of weight in the short term, and we're putting it all on, plus potentially more in the long term. And as we get older, this tends to be drop weight, we put it back on. We drop weight, we put it back on. And we actually end up going upwards over time, right? And this is something that has become a huge problem when we start to see our body slowing down as we start to age. Our body's not responding as well as it used to be. so it becomes harder to do. We see that it's becoming more challenging to drop that body fat, and that trajectory, no matter how much effort we put in, continues to go up, right? And that's where I want to walk you through this conversation so we can actually break that cycle a little bit. Okay, that's all I want to go through today. As you can tell, I can walk through this all day long, but I just want to give you an awareness of breaking these steps down into asking the bigger questions of, are you working with your body or are you working against it? And if you're going through a plan, making it hard and having to have all the willpower in the world and adding in the extra workout because you haven't dropped the body fat, so you need to train more, please take the time to find a brake pedal. Find the time to look at this smarter. And if you want to go into this with me personally, please, when I send through the link for the gut reset plan, you'll have the opportunity to jump on a call with our team, walk through that process and just see how we do this a little bit more, because there's a lot of variables that we take into account to really make sure this is smart, sustainable change long term, working with your body, building a skill set of what actually makes a difference, and going through that full process. So one last time, like I said at the start, if you want access to that gut reset plan, building a foundation of what those foods might look like to really build an awareness of smart, sustainable change through real food, not pills and slim shakes, and starting to look at something that can build a balanced nutrition plan that allows us to build our body back up, simply comment gut reset below, and one of our team, likely Jared, will send that one through. And if there's anything else that I can answer for you after the call, please let me know or reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer that too. If you're, like I said, if you're on YouTube or watching this podcast or YouTube, simply go to our Body Reset Facebook page, and this is where you get access to this stuff directly. This is for our private community, and you're more than welcome to join us in there. I hope this was helpful and insightful for you, and I hope you're having an incredible week so far. I've got to head off now, so I hope that was helpful, and we will talk again very soon. Bye.